So originally we talked about individual risks and described the positive or the negative risks that can happen. But a risk usually doesn't stand alone. A risk is embedded into a risk management plan which holds all the potential risks that an organization has identified and that an organization felt need to be tracked. In order to get to such a risk management plan, one first has to identify those risks and evaluate those risks with respect to the impact and to the likelihood and eventually the detectability as we described that. Now, once the risk had been identified and described, then the risks need to be analyzed on a more or less ongoing basis, which in fact means that the appropriate individuals in the organization need to analyze or look at the data, not analyze, the system is going to analyze it, but the people need to look at the data and draw appropriate conclusions from what they see. So once they notice something that requires a particular action, for instance sending a monitor to a site and retrain the sites again, then this is something that a person in the industry, in the respective department has to trigger. It may be that the risk definition had been too tight, which means that almost all the data, all the information seems to be risky, and that may require that a risk needs to be changed, or the definition of a risk or the thresholds need to be changed. And that, of course, is something that needs to be documented during the course of a trial, during the course of a program or project development. The risk management analysis and the appropriate actions to be taken is something that needs to be done on an ongoing basis. So a risk management plan is not something that is a stable document or a stable process. It continuously has to be revised and adjusted to the respective needs. And of course, those adjustments have to be documented because eventually health authorities may be interested in understanding why a certain risk had been put under a certain threshold or why a certain risk had not been observed. Now, overall, when you look at a risk management plan, it will never ever cover all potential risks that are associated with the conduct of a clinical trial. And those remaining risks that nobody thought of, that nobody implemented, and that probably were not even worthwhile considering are called the residual risks, which, worst case scenario, once in a while may surface and then should be addressed, but that is something that is a rare case, and the organization just needs to be prepared that something like that can happen. We talked about, the various white papers by FDA and EMA, and now the next step is, how do I implement a risk-based monitoring strategy? The first aspect is that it is very important that one fully understands the protocol, fully understands where do I stand with respect to the development with my drug right now. Am I in still the early phase 2A, or do I know already a lot about my product and therefore can be a little more relaxed? What is it that I know about external factors and internal factors and risks, such as, for instance, the sites that are supposed to participate in a trial? How good is my monitoring organization? Do I have the appropriate SOPs in place, etc.? So it is very important prior to setting up a risk-based monitoring strategy to have all the facts on the table and fully understand what my risks are. And this is certainly something that is not a static process or a static action, but rather evolving a process, which means with each and every new study I have to look back and see what did I learn from my previous trial or trials and adjust my risk-based monitoring plan accordingly. So we already heard about several potential pitfalls in the conduct of clinical trials, and one additional one is that the data that we all base our analyses on arrive way too late. These could be data that had been entered, for instance, by site staff, but it could also be external data like from central labs where there are data in there that should be reacted upon. So when you look at EDC data, usually these data are being entered within a week, if you're lucky, or sometimes within weeks or months only. And of course, when you run such an analysis, a risk-based monitoring strategy analysis on those rather old data, the options available to react appropriately are rather limited. So one important aspect in this entire risk-based monitoring environment is that the data are being entered in a timely fashion, whether by investigators and site staff, or also data from third parties, whether this is central lab data, central ECG data, or any other third-party data. All these data need to be available rather quickly so that the appropriate analyses can be performed and then actions taken.